Hey everybody, you're watching ASMR Angel Reads. I'm hoping to get done with chapter 1 today. And in the future, if the chapters are that long, I'll probably break them up into 2 days, even if they're a little over 30 minutes. You have to forgive my voice. I'm mucusy today. Also, just so you know, I do have another channel. It's called Angels, Orchids, and More, and it's a hobby channel that I have. It's mostly orchid videos if you want to check it out, but I have some pet videos on there of my spiders and my dog and my cat. I have some chisel videos. Those are my most popular, actually, and a few other odds and end hobbies that I like to do. And I know I never say it, but I will this time. If you could subscribe and like and just let people know I'm out there, I'd appreciate it. Now let's get started. Daggerspell, still chapter 1. Let me see. Let's go back a little bit. That was honorable, Da, not killing him, and then letting him go home. Honorable, I'll tell you, my sweet, it's every silver dagger's dream to capture a lord single-handedly. It's the coin you want, not the glory. And by the hills, many a poor lordling has made himself rich, a rich lord doing the same thing. Jill was honestly shocked. Taking someone prisoner for profit was one of those things she never got mentioned in the bard songs and the glorious tales of war. She was glad enough for the coin, however, especially when Colin brought her a pony, a slender gray that she named Gwendorick, after the great hero of ancient times. When they returned to the inn, Colin took Jill up to the chamber and made her change her clothes, then unceremoniously cropped off her hair like a lad's with his silver dagger. That long hair is too messy for the road. May the gods blast me if I spend my time combing it for you like a nursemaid. Jill supposed that was right, but when she looked at herself in his bit of the mirror, she felt that she no longer really knew who she was. Feeling persisted when they went down to the tavern room of the inn for the noon meal. She wanted to get up and help Blair, the innkeep, serve, not sit there and eat stew with the other customers. Because it was market day, the tavern was crowded with merchants who all wore checked briga as a sign of their station. They looked at Colin over his shoulder for the silver dagger in his belt and gave him a wide berth as possible. Jill was just finishing her stew when 3 young riders from the warband swaggered in and demanded ale. Jill knew they were the Lord's riders because their shirts had embroidered blazons running stags, in this case, on the yokes. They stood right in the way near the door and kept Blair so busy that when Colin wanted more ale, he had to get up and fetch it himself. As he was coming back with a full tankard, he passed the 3 riders. One of them stepped forward and deliberately jogged Colin's arm, making him spill the ale. "Watch your step," the rider sneered. Silver Dagger Colin set the tankard down and turned to face him. Jill climbed up on the table so she could see. Grinning, the other 2 riders moved back to the wall. "Are you looking for a fight?" Colin said. "Just looking to make a lout out of a silver dagger. Mind his manners. What's your name, scum?" "Colin of Caremore, and what is it to you?" The room went dead silent as every man in it turned to stare. The other 2 riders laid urgent hands on their friends' shoulders. "Come along, Gruffid, just drink your wretched ale. You're a bit young to die." "Get away," Gruffid snarled. "Are you calling me a coward?" "Calling you a fool," the rider glanced at Colin. "Here, our apologies." "Don't you apologize for me," Gruffid said. "I don't give a pig's fart if he's the Lord of Hell. Listen, Silver Dagger, not half half of those tales about you can be true. Indeed, Colin laid his hand on his sword hilt. It seemed the whole room gasped when the walls, or even the walls. Jill clasped her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. Frightened men leapt back. Here, Blair, he yelped, not in my inn. Too late. Gruffydd drew his sword with a sour smile. Colin drew his own, but he let the blade trail lazily in his hand with the point near the floor. The room was so quiet that Jill heard her heart pounding. Gruffydd moved and struck. His sword went flying. Across the room, men yelped and dodged as the sword fell clattering to the floor. Colin had his back raised, but casually, as if he were only using it to point out something. There was a smear of blood on it. Cursing under his breath, Gruffydd clutched his right wrist with his left hand, and blood welled between his fingers. I call you all to witness that he struck first, Colin said. The room broke into excited whispers as Gruffydd's friends dragged him away. Blair hurried after them, quite pale and carrying the rider's sword. Colin wiped the blood off his blade on his brigand leg, sheathed it, and then picked up the tankard, then came back to the table. Jill, get down, he snapped. Where's your courtesies? I just wanted to see, Da. That was splendid. I never even saw you move. Neither did he. Well, Jill, I'm going to drink this ale, and then we'll be packing up and getting on the road. I thought we were going to stay here tonight. We were. Ale, all a fluiter Blair ran over. I don't know. I never heard of this. A fluer Blair ran over. By the pink asses of the gods, how often does this sort of thing happen to you? Far too often. These young dogs would count in an honor to be the man who killed Colin of Cremor. Colin took his long swallow of ale. So far, all they won for their trouble is broken wrists, but ye gods, it wearies me. So it must, Blair shuddered as if he were cold. Well, lass, it's a strange life you're going to lead, riding with him. You'll make some man a cursed strange wife someday, too. I'll never marry a man who isn't as great swordsman as my Da, so probably I'll never marry at all. That afternoon they rode fast and steadily, finally stopping about an hour before sunset when Colin judged that they'd gotten far enough away from Gruffydd's warband. They found a farmer who let them camp in the corner of his pasture and who sold them their oats for Colin's horse and the new pony. While Colin scourged dead wood from the nearby forest for a fire, Jill put the horses on their tether ropes and staked them out. She had to stand on the head of the stakes and use her whole weight, but finally she forced them in. She was staring back at the camp when a gray gnome appeared, popping into reality in front of her and dancing up and down. With a laugh, Jill picked him up into her arms. You did follow me. That gladdens my heart. The gnome gave her a gape-mouthed grin and put his arms around her neck. He felt dry, a little scaly to the touch, and smelled of freshly turned earth. Without thinking, Jill carried him back to camp and talked all the while about the things that had happened on the road. He listened solemnly, then suddenly twisted in her arms in alarm and pointed. Jill saw Colin trotting back with a load of wood, and his eyes were narrow with exasperation. The gnome vanished. Jill, by the gods, Colin snapped. What cursed, strange kind of game of such were you playing? Talking to yourself and pretending to carry something, I mean? It was not, Dad, just a game. Colin clumped the wood onto the ground. I won't have it. It makes you look like a half-wit or such like, standing around talking to yourself. I'll buy you a doll if you want something to talk to that badly. I've got a doll, my thanks. Then why don't you talk to it? I will, Dad, promise. Colin set his hands on his hips and looked her over. And just what were you pretending? More of that nonsense about wild folks? Jill hung her head and began scrubbing at the grass with her toe of her boot. Colin slapped her across the face. I don't want to hear a word of it. Not more of this babbling to yourself. I won't, Da, promise. Jill bit her lip hard to keep back the tears. Oh, here. Suddenly Colin knelt down in front of her and put his hands on her shoulders. Forgive me the slip, my sweet. Your poor old father is all to pieces these days. He hesitated for a moment, looking honestly troubled. Jill, listen to me. There's plenty of people in the kingdom who believe the wild folks are real enough. Do you know what else they believe? That anyone who can see them is a witch. Do you know what that can happen to you if someone heard you talking to the wild folks? For all that year, but alas, there could be trouble over it. I don't want to have to cut my way through a crowd of farmers just to keep you from being beaten to death. Jill went cold all over and started shaking. Colin drew her into his arms and hugged her, but she felt like shoving him away and running wildly into the forest. But I do see them, she thought. Does that make me a witch? Am I going to turn into an old hag and have the evil eye and poison people with herbs? When she realized that she couldn't even share these fears with her father, she began to cry. Oh, here, Colin said. My apologies. Now don't think of it anymore and we'll have a bit to eat. But now you know why you can't go babbling about wild folks where other people can hear you. I won't, Da. I truly, truly promise. In the middle of the night, Jill woke up to find the world turned to silver by moonlight. The gray gnome was hunkered down near her head as if he were keeping guard over her. Since Colin was snoring loudly, Jill risked whispering to him. You're my best and truest friend, but I don't want to be a witch. The gnome shook his head in a vigorous no. Isn't it true only witches see you? Again came the reassuring no. He patted her face gently and then disappeared in a gust of wind that seemed to send the moonlight dancing. For a long time, Jill lay awake, smiling to herself in profound relief. Yet she knew what her Da was right. From now on, she would have to be careful, very careful. I need a drink of water. The folks of Devry have always been the restless sort. In the old days of the dawn time, the ancestors wandered thousands of miles before they settled the old kingdom, Devrian Riga, which was a part of the faraway land called Galia. The bards still tell many a tale of how the ancestors fled the encrypted. I need my glasses. I can't see this. Which is part of the faraway land called Galia. The bards still tell many a tale of how the ancestors fled the encroaching Romans and sailed across the vast ocean under the leadership of King Bran to find the Western Isles. They rode all over the island too before King Bran saw the omen of the white sow that told him where to find the holy city of Dundevry. Even during Jill's time, there were still people who lived more on the roads than at home. Priests on pilgrimages, young men riding from one lord to another in hopes of finding a place in a war band, and of course silver daggers. After a few weeks of riding with her father, Jill realized that the lure of the road had caught her too. There was always something new to see, someone new to meet. She wondered how she'd ever endured being confined to one small village. Since Colin had plenty of coin, Jill was surprised when he began to look for another hire. As the road aimlessly east through Carragoni, he was always asking for news of feuds and border wars. The summer's half gone, he told Jill one night at their campfire. A silver dagger has to think about coin for the winter. Well, not that many of my wretched band do think, mind, but they don't have the daughter to worry about. True spoken, Dot. Did you ever have to sleep out in the snow? I didn't, because I could always ride back in winter with your mother. All at once, Colin turned melancholy, his face slack as if he were suddenly exhausted. Ah, ye gods, I only hope no word of this comes to her in the other lands, her only child riding the roads with a man like me. Da, you're splendid, and this is splendid too. When I grow up, I'll be a silver dagger like you. Listen to you, lass. Lasses can't be warriors. Why not? They were back in the dawn time, like Ava. Have you heard those songs, Da? Lord Mellon's bard used to come to the tavern, and he'd sing for me sometimes. I always asked for the ones about Aya, and she was splendid. She was a hawk woman, you see. Oh, I've heard the tales, but that was long ago. Things are different now. Why, that's not fair. Besides, where was Lady Guinevere, too? And she was only back in the time of troubles, not the dawn time. These men insult her honor, and she gets them for it. Jill laid her hand on her heart, just as the bard did. Back they fall, and bright blood blooms on the helms and hearts as the hells claim them. I learned that bit by heart. If ever we ride back to Beaubrier, I'm going to have a thing or two to say to Lord Mellon's bard. Ye gods, what have I sired? Someone just like you. That's what Mama always says. She said I was stubborn just like you and every bit as nasty when I wanted to be. Colin laughed, muttered chuckle under his breath. It was the first time Jill had ever heard him laugh aloud. It was 2 days later that Colin got the news he wanted to hear about a hire. They stopped in the midst of a grove of oak trees for their noon meal, and they were eating bread and cheese when Jill heard the sound of 2 horses trotting straight for them. Colin was up and standing with his sword drawn before the sound truly made sense to her. Jill scrambled up just as the horsemen came in sight, ducking and dodging under the branches. They were armed, wearing chainmail, and their swords were drawn. Hold and stand, the leader called out. As they rode into the clearing, Colin stepped smoothly between them and Jill. The men pulled up their horses, then suddenly smiled. The leader leaned over the saddles. My apologies, I thought you were some of Lord Union's men. Never even heard of him, Colin said. What have we done, wandered into a feud? Just that, we served Tyrion Braid, and these woods are his by every god. I'd never deny it. Does the Lord Yenid? He does. He's your silver. Here you're a silver dagger looking for a hire. There's only 4 against us. Yenid's 7, you see. By the hills, Colin tossed his head. This must have been a bloody little affair. Well, not truly, you see. There were only 5 against 7 to begin with, but you go speak with our Lord. The Dun's just 2 miles down the road. You can't miss it. The rider spoke the truth about that, certainly. Out in the middle of the cleared farmland rose a low hill ringed with the massive stone walls of Tyrion Dun. Behind them stood a brooch that was at least 4 stories high, with a red and gray pendant flying proudly at the top. Yet as they rode up to it, Jill saw that the great iron-bound gates in the walls were only for show. A long time ago, the walls had been slighted and breached with 3 gaps, wide enough to drive a wagon through. Ivy grew over the heaped rubble. Inside they found a muddy ward that had once sheltered many buildings. To judge from the circular foundation and the occasional piece of standing wall left amid the tall grasses round one side of the brooch itself, the wall at the top story had been knocked away. Jill could see into the little empty chambers. What did that, Da? A catapult, no doubt. The ward was silent and empty except for a flock of big white geese poking for snails in the ivy-covered rubble. When Colin called out a hello, the young boy with the dirty red and gray tabard over his shirt and Brigham ran out of the grot. Who are you? Colin of Cremore, I want to speak to your lord. Well, Da's talking to him right now, but they won't mind if you just come in. Now here, you're supposed to bow to me and say I'll cease, good sir, but the great Tyrant Braid may have important business afoot. But he doesn't. He never does anything unless he's fighting the Lord Yenin, and he isn't today. Tyrant Braid's great hall had once been great indeed, a vast circular room encompassing the entire ground floor of the grot. Either side were two massive stone hearths covered with bands of interlacement and lions. In between, stretching enough space to hold 200 men at their feasting. Now, however, the far hearth served as a kitchen where the slatternly lass stood at a battered table and chopped carrots and turnips while the joint of mutton roasted on the spit. By the near hearth were 3 tables and unsteady-looking benches. 2 men were sitting and drinking at one of them, a man of solid years with a soft black beard and a tall, pale lad about 17 with a long nose that reminded Jill of a rabbit. Since he was wearing plaid brigga and a shirt embroidered with lions, the lad had to be the Tyrant. The young page skipped up to the table and tugged on Tyrant's sleeve. Your Grace, the silver dagger here named Colin of Cremore. Indeed, Braid rose from his chair. Now this is a handy thing. Come join me. Without ceremony, Braid sat Jill and Colin down on the bench, sent the boy Abram to fetch more ale all around, and introduced the older man to Glenn, his counselor. When the Tyrant sat down again, his chair creaked alarmingly. I met a pair of your men in the oak woods, your Grace, Colin said. They told me of your feud. Ah, Yenid, that bastard-born son of a slug. Braid took a moody sip of ale. Truly, I want to offer you a hire, but my treasury matches the dun walls. He glanced at Glenn. Could we squeeze out something? A horse, I suppose, my lord. He could always sell it in the town for a coin. True, Braid suddenly grinned. Or here, what about cabbages? I've got fields and fields of those. Here, Silver Dagger, think of all the uses cabbages have. You can let them rot, then throw them at the enemies in the street. Or if you're courting a witch, you can give her a bouquet of fresh ones. And that's something she'll never see again. Your Grace, Glenn broke in. Well, truly, I remember a bit, Braid said after another long swallow of ale. But if you'll take a horse and your maintenance for your page, of course. I will, Colin said. Done, Your Grace, I'm on. But this is my daughter, actually, not a page. So she is, Braid leaned closer. Do you honor your father, child? More than any man in the world except the king, of course, but I've never even met him. Well spoken, Braid belched profoundly. What a pity that the pus-boil Yenid doesn't have the respect for the king that we see in this innocent little lass. Colin turned to address the questions to the counselor Glenn. What's this feud about, good sir? The riders only told me that the woods were in dispute. Well, more or less, Glenn stroked his beard thoughtfully. The feud goes back a long time when Lord Yenon's grandfather declared war on his Grace's grandfather. In those days they were fighting over who should be Tyrant and many other grave matters, but bit by bit the thing's gotten itself settled. The woods, you see, lie on the border of the 2 demences. They are the last thing left to squabble over. So Yenon thinks. Braid slammed his head onto the table. A counselor from the High King himself judged the matter and awarded the claim to me. Now, Your Grace, Glenn said soothingly, Yenon's only disputing part of the judgment. He seeded you, the trees. But the bastard insists he has ancient and prior claims to swine rights. Swine rights, Colin said. Swine rights, Glenn said. In the fall, you see, the peasants take the swine into the woods to eat the acorns. Now there are only enough acorns for one herd of swine, his or ours. And the withered testicle of the sterile donkey says it's his, Braid broke in. His men killed one of my riders when the lad turned me and his hogs out to the woods last fall. Colin sighed and had a very long swallow of ale. I don't understand, Jill broke in. You mean someone who was killed over pig food? It's the honor of the thing. Braid slammed his tankard on the table so hard that the ale jumped out and spilled. Never will I let a man take what's rightfully mine. The honor of my warband calls for the vengeance. We'll fight to the last man. Pity we can't arm the swine, Colin said. Everyone will fight for their own food. Now splendid, Braid gave him a delightful grin. They shall have little helms with their tusks for swords, and we shall teach them to trot with the sound of a horn. Your Grace, Glenn moaned. Well, truly, I ramble again. Glenn and Aberrn, the counselor's son, as it turned out, took Jill and Colin out to the last building standing in the ward, the barracks. As was usual the case, the warband slept directly above the stables. In the winter, the body heat from the horses helped keep the men warm. But now, on the warm summer day, the smell of horse was overwhelming. Glenn showed Colin a pair of unoccupied bunks, then lingered to watch Colin begin to stow away their gear. You know, Silverdagger, I don't mind admitting that it gladdens my heart to have a man of your experience join the warband. My thanks. Have you served the Tiran long, good sir? All his life. I served his father first, you see, and truly he was a great man. He's the one who settled the war and ward by law and sword. I fear me that Tiran Braid takes more after his grandfather. Glenn paused, turning to Aberrn. Now, Aberrn, Jill is our guest, so be courteous to her and take her outside to play. That means you're going to say something interesting, Aberrn whined. Jill, Colin said, out. Jill grabbed Aberrn's arm and hustled him out of the barracks fast. They lingered at the stables and watched the geese waddling through the rubble. Do those geese bite? Jill said. They do. Huh, I bet you're scared. Oh, do you now? You're a lass. Lasses are always scared. We are not. You are too, and you finally got a funny name. Jill's not a real name. It's a bondswoman's name. So what? What do you mean, so what? It's the worst thing, being one of the bondfolk. You shouldn't be wearing those brigga either. I'm not a bondswoman, and my dog gave me these brigga. Your dog's a Silverdagger, and they're all scum. Jill hauled back and hit him in the face as hard as she could. Aberrn shrieked and bit back, but he dodged and punched him, but she dodged and punched him in the ear. With a howl, he leapt for her and knocked her down, but she shoved her elbow into his stomach until he let go. They wrestled, kicking, punching, and writhing until Jill heard Colin and Gil yelling at them to stop. Suddenly, Colin grabbed Jill by the shoulder and pulled her off helpless. Aberrn. Now what's all this? He said Silverdagger were all scum, so I hit him. Aberrn sat up, sniveling, wiping his bloody nose. Colin gave Jill a long grin and hastily took stern again. Now here, Aberrn, Glenn grabbed the boy. That's a nasty way to treat a guest. If you don't learn courtesy, how can you serve a great lord someday? Berating him all the while, Glenn hauled Aberrn off into the broch. Colin began brushing the dirt off Jill's clothes. By the asses of the gods, my sweet, how did you learn to fight like that? Back in Bovier, you know, the children always called me a bastard, and they said I had a bondswoman name, so I hit them, and then I learned how to win. Well, so you did. Ye gods, you're Colin of Kremer's daughter now, sure enough. For the rest of the day, Jill and Abram scrupulously avoided each other, but on the morning, Abram came up to her. He looked at the ground near her feet and kicked a lump of dirt with his toe of his clog. I'm sorry I said your dad was a scum, and my dad said you can have any name you want to, and you can wear Brigit if you want to, and I'm sorry about all of it. My thanks, and I'm sorry I made your nose bleed. I didn't mean to hit you that hard. Abram looked up, grinning. Want to play warrior? I've got 2 wooden swords. For the next couple of days, life went on quietly in Tyrion Braid's done. In the morning, Cullen and 2 of the riders rode out to patrol the oak woods in the afternoons, and the Tyrion and the other 2 riders relieved them. Jill helped Abram with his tasks around the dun, which left them plenty of time to play at swords or with Abram's leather ball. Jill's only problem with Abram's mother, who believed Jill should be learning needlework instead of playing outside. Jill grew quite clever at avoiding her. At meals, the warband ate at one table in the great hall, while the Tyrion and Glenn's family ate at another. Once the counselor retired to his chamber, however, Braid would come drink with the riders. He always talked about the feud, which he knew year by year from even that had happened long before he was born, down the most recent insult. Finally, after about a week of this pleasant routine, Braid hurried over to the warband's table one evening with his pale eyes gleaming. He had news. A servant had been to the local village and overheard gossip about Enid's plans. The baseboard pussboil. He's claiming that since the swine rights are his, he can send his swine any time he likes, summer or fall. They say he's planning on sending a few pigs in under armed guard. Except for Cullen, the warband began cursing and slamming their tankers on the table. And I say he won't set another trotter in my woods, Braid went on. From now on, the full warband's going to ride on patrol. The warband cheered. Your Grace, Cullen broke in, if I may speak. By all means, I value your experience in the field highly. My thanks, Your Grace. Well, here the woods are a bit long for only one patrol. The warman might be down to one end while Enid's making his entry at the other. We best split into 2 patrols and ride crisscross routes. We can use the page and the servant to send messages and such like. Well spoken, we'll do that, and take Abram along with you. Can I go, Your Grace? Jill burst out. I've got my own pony. Jill, hush, Cullen snapped. Now there's a lass with her father's spirit, Braid said with a grin. You may come indeed. I think. Okay. It's been 30 minutes and we're still not done with chapter 1. I am going to put this up later tonight and try to finish chapter 1 tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye.